Yin, come on, wake up. And Yin furrowed as she turned in her bed, not bothering to open her eyes as she knew who was calling her up. She let out a sigh as she tried, and she had a smile on her face as she continued to sleep. She wheezed out as she felt Sabito plopping himself onto her body as she turned her body, rendering him to be lying on her stomach instead as he flashed her a cute smile. What? I don't have any lessons today. Why are you disturbing my rest? She asked, and Sabito batted his eyelashes at her and Yin frowned. Accompany me, please, he asked in a pleading tone, and Yin let out a sigh, then as she slowly nodded her head. Wait, to where? To do what? She asked, and Sabito flung her wardrobe open and rummaged through it, humming a satisfying tune to himself as he chose the clothes for her to wear. You will know. Come on, breakfast is ready. Time to go, he said with a wide smile, and Yin felt like she wasn't ready for what was going to come. She let out a sigh, then as Sabito held her hand and pulled her out of her bed, causing her to stumble to her feet, and ended up face-planting against his chest. Ugh, stop it, she muttered out, and Sabito chuckled as he easily carried her and waddled over to the bathroom, stopping in front of the door as he lets go of her. She then sighs as she was soon shoved with the clothes he had chosen and ushered into the bathroom. Don't take too long. Don't wash your hair too much, he yelled out. Then she shut the door, and Yin groaned in response as she proceeded to shower her body and wash her face, whereas Sabito just hummed a tune to himself as he sat down at the dining table and waited for her to finish so that they could eat their late breakfast. He then scrolled through his phone as he chuckled, as he looked at how his friends were raging in the group chat about the fact of how they had to deal with the activity they needed to complete today, and how they had asked the girls to help as well, which made Sabito feel that he needs to ask Yin for help as well. As soon as he heard the bathroom door opening and Yin coming out, with a slight pout on her face, he then chuckled as he noticed how she had tied her hair up into a messy bun, if he can do so, and scrunched her nose up slightly as he took her seat before the simple breakfast made by him. So where are we going today? What are we doing? She asked as she started to take a sip of the hot miso soup that Sabito had made. She then noticed how he remained silent, and she raised an eyebrow in response as she sat up straight. You will know when you get there. Maybe I should blindfold you? He spoke out, and Yin rolled her eyes in response as she parted her lips to enjoy some of the fried rice that he had made. Whatever you say, kinky man, she spoke out, and the duo started to enjoy their breakfast peacefully, with the occasional glances and laughter as they slowly showed one another at what they had seen on their phone. Slowly settling down, Yin asked out, So why specifically this outfit? She was looking at what Sabito was wearing and looked towards what he had chosen. He then shrugged his shoulders in response, and Yin let out a sigh. It had been a long time since she wore her sports attire for any occasion, and today seems to be a day for it to happen. She then watched as he was wearing a tank top, and her small hands found its way to his biceps as she gently held them, causing him to flinch upon the contact, and he turned to look at how she was admiring his biceps, and his face flushed red as she looked very interested in them, which was surprising for him given how other girls would touch his muscles, but he wouldn't blush. But when it comes to Yin, he easily blushes at the simplest of things, such as her smiling at him, and then what she was too, wearing a tank top, as well as she brought out her arm to flex, but had no visible muscles, caused him to chuckle as he poked her arm a little, and she scrunched her nose in response. She mumbled out as he shook his head as she went to sit in the living room while waiting for him to finish his chores for the morning. She then hummed a tune to herself as she waited patiently as soon as he came out of his bedroom and motioned for her to put on her slippers. Slippers? She muttered out, and he nodded his head in response. She then hummed in response as she stood up, walking towards the front door as she easily slipped on her slippers. My phone was... I got them. It's in my bag. Don't worry. He spoke out, and Yin blinked her eyes a few times and slowly nodded her head as she looked at him, slipping on his slippers as well. The duo left the apartment and Yin locked the door behind her. So, are you going to blindfold me? She asked, and Sabito shook his head as he guided her towards where they were going. She then frowned when she noticed they were heading for the academy, and she looked as Sabito was trying to contain a smirk, preventing it from appearing on his face. Are we going swimming? She asked to Sabito. Something like that. And she could only sigh as they walked towards where the outdoor swimming pool was, and her eyes widened when she noticed how her friends were present as well in the outdoor swimming pool. She noticed how there was no water in it, though. Yin, here you are. Yay, we can do the cleaning up together. Yin squealed out, and Yin's eyes widened as she snapped her head to look at Sabito, who was now standing at a good distance away from her. You? She yelled out, and Sabito hid behind Tengen and showed her a peace sign. Asshole, you woke me up to do this? She muttered out, and Sabito could only chuckle. Yin then let out a sigh as she realized there was no way she was going to get out of there, nor will she be going back to the apartment peacefully, at least. She sighed as she noticed Sabito had entered the pool and was now at the bottom floor. She noticed how he was motioning for her to calm down, and she slowly descended by climbing down the step ladder at the slide, and soon hopped off of it. So, where should we get this started? She asked, and Sabito shrugged his shoulders in response. We have a fun way to clean up. Sabito spoke out, and Yin noticed how Sanemi was at the bottom of the pool as well, and Kane was between them. And Yin's eyes widened when she was sprayed water with. Hey, it's cold! She yelled out and started to shiver, whereas everyone could only laugh as Sabito chuckled as well, wrapping an arm around her shoulder and tugging her into a warm hug. There, that ought to keep you warm, he spoke out, and Yin rolled her eyes and smacked him harshly on the stomach, which he winces and bends down slightly. And Yin sighed as she realized Sanemi and Sabito were playing about with the scrumbling brooms, and they raised each other from one end to the other, and Kane, along with her, slowly climbed back up. She sat down at the edge as she allowed herself to bask in the sunlight to dry, only to feel someone tug at her ankle, and she looked down, noticing how Sabito had a wide smile as his arms wrenched open. Let's scrub together, he yelled out, and Yin raised an eyebrow in response and shook her head as she allowed herself to hop down from the edge, and Sabito caught her with ease, handing her a scrubbing broom as well, and the duo started to scrub the area they were taking care of, while the others handled other areas. Eventually, Yin and Sabito were done with their part of the pool, and they climbed out of the pool only to be sprayed with water by Gyo. Sabito then stood in front of Yin, shielding her with his back facing Gyo, and they could only chuckle as Gyo continued to spray, not even bothering to stop as well. Well, this is why I told you to wear that, Sabito spoke out as they sat down on the edge together, and the others had finished cleaning up the pool. They were waiting for the water to fill up the swimming pool, and they could only let themselves dry under the blazing hot sun. Well, you were being an asshole, Yin spoke out, and Sabito chuckled then as he nuzzled his head against hers, and she couldn't help but laugh as he was tickling her as well. Soon they felt the water touching their feet, and they realized it was okay for them to dive in, which then Yin stood up, not fond of swimming as well as she walked towards the shelter instead, only to have muscular arms wrapped around her waist as she was easily carried up into the air, and next thing she knew, she ended up being in the swimming pool. She resurfaced and looked around, wondering who had done it, and she noticed she was the only one in the pool. She then looked to her friends, who shrugged their shoulders in response, only to turn when Sabito resurfaced from the water and chuckled at her angry look. Oh God, you look so adorable when you're angry. And Yin didn't give him any chances as she grabbed a hold of him by the shoulders and pushed him down into the water, which allowed her to bring her knees up, and she used her feet to push herself up, causing Sabito to sink more as she swam towards the edge and got out of the pool with ease. Hey, that was playing dirty, he yelled out, and Yin rolled her eyes in response, only to have herself being pulled in the pool once more by the ankle and spat out some water. She then pursed her nose up as she swam towards where Mitsuri was holding her hand out as she grabbed a hold of it. Oops, she called out, and watched as Mitsuri fell into the water with Obanai, and they laughed at what had happened, only to have Obanai glaring daggers at her, whereas Mitsuri was just laughing together with her. Well then, seems like you don't regret waking up to this. Sabito spoke out, and Yin let out a sigh as she splashed water into his face and started to swim away from him. Don't think you can outswim me, Yin. And Yin stopped swimming as she realized how fast Sabito was catching up to her, and immediately was her waist wrapped upon with muscular arms, and she soon heard splashing noises, realizing how Kane and the others were pulled into the water as well. Cannonball! Tengen yelled out, and Sabito quickly covered Yin to shield her from the impact as Tengen and Kojiro jumped into the pool, causing the huge splash to happen. Okay, we should stop and head back. Later we get reported by the security for fooling around instead of cleaning up. Sunami spoke out, and they quickly got out of the pool, dripping wet. Yin then sighed as she grabbed a hold of the ends of her hair and squeezed the ends dry as much as she could, only to have Sabito sling his arm over her shoulder. Let's walk like this back to the apartment so you don't catch a cold. He spoke out, and she only let out a sigh, only to catch a towel that was thrown at them by Obanai. She then smiled and wrapped it around herself and stuck her tongue out to Sabito, who only scowled as his face looked towards Sanemi, who shrugged his shoulders in response. Achoo! She then sneezed and walked out of the academy, and Sabito chuckled as he walked closer towards her, which she eventually gave up and wrapped her arms around his muscular arm for warmth. She then let out a satisfied sigh as how warm he was. Anyways, want to have dinner together? Sabito asked his friends, and Yin noticed they were all agreeing as her lips parted as she pinched him harshly. You choose the day when I'm the one who's going to cook dinner. You're torturing me, she snapped, and Sabito shrugged his shoulders as he took off running, and Yin started to chase after him. Yin, be careful, your slippers are wet and you might... And they winced when they saw Yin falling and scraping her knee in the process. They quickly rushed over to check on her as Sabito was squatting in front of her as well. You alright? He asked, and watched as she slowly stood up, showing him her knees that were badly bleeding now. He winced out at how bad they were, and eventually carried her upon his arms instead. What are you doing? I can still walk, she snapped, and Sabito shook his head in response. Nope, I'm going to bring you back quickly so that you can shower and we can treat your wounds. He spoke out, and Yin turned to look at her girlfriends and reach out for them for some help, which Mitsuri was about to grab a hold of her hand, only to have Sabito walking off at a quick pace. Dinner at 7! He yelled out to the girls and boys, which only looked at one another, wondering what had just happened as Sabito soon disappeared from their view. Yin then sighed as Sabito managed to somehow get in front of their apartment, unlock the door where he finally sets her down to the ground. She then quickly made her way towards the bathroom instead and proceeded to shower, whereas Sabito waited patiently in the kitchen so that he wouldn't be dripping water everywhere. And he noticed how vibrations were coming from his bag, which he didn't bother to check yet as he didn't want to get anything wet. He soon heard the bathroom door open and Yin come out with a painful look on her face. He chuckled softly as he went to shower quickly as Yin sat down into the living room instead as she started to look at the wounds that were bleeding slightly now. She then heard footsteps and noticed that Sabito came out once more, wrapped in his towel as usual as she let out a sigh, and he chuckled as he turned to show... I can't say that on here. Stop it! I might need acid to wash my eyes. She spoke out, and Sabito chuckled as he quickly went to his room to change into comfortable clothing. He soon came out with his hair dripping wet, and Yin let out a sigh as she came over with the medicine. He proceeded to squat in front of her as he attended to her wounds, and delicate hands found its way towards the towel that was wrapped around his head as she started to ruffle his hair, drying his hair while he wrapped her wounds with gauze. She then watched as he stood up and went into his bag to grab a hold of their phones and handed her hers. She unlocked it, and her eyes widened slightly as she was shown on screen. Oh crap, she muttered out, and Sabito looked worried. What? You pregnant? He asked as he feigned a shocked look on his face as Ian chuckled and chucked the cushions at him once again as she proceeded to call her father, given how their reformers calls. Hello? Papa, what's wrong? She asked as Sabito started to patch up her knees as she winced now and then. What? Are you serious? She asked as she looked at Sabito with a shocked look on her face, and he stopped at what he was doing as he looked at her, confused. He watched as she hung up the phone, just in time as the doorbell rang. He got up and walked over towards the front door and opened it for their friends, who ended up buying their food instead. We bought fried chicken and sodas, Mitsuri squealed out, and Yin laughed as they came over to the coffee table and set the food and drinks on the table. How's your injury? Did Sabito-kun dress you up properly? Shinobu asked, and she let out a sigh as she noticed how the dressing wasn't the best, but sighed. She then proceeded to redo it for Yin so that the wounds wouldn't get infected. Well, let's eat. Since we did have a whole day of work today, we decided to eat this much. Mitsuri squealed out as she sat next to Yin and hugged her tighter. Hi, let's eat. And the boys gathered around the coffee table as well as Sabito switched the TV on and decided to watch some shows while they ate. Only for Yin to forget what she wanted to tell Sabito about earlier.